So sitting around just like waiting for someone to just wave a wand and light your loins on fire doesn't really work.
You're listening to Overwhelmed Working Woman, the podcast that helps you be more calm and more productive by doing less. I'm your host, Michelle Gauthier, a former overwhelmed working woman and current life coach. On this show, we unpack the stress and pressure that today's working woman experiences. And in each episode, you'll get a strategy to bring more calm, ease, and relaxation to your life. Hello, friends. Thanks for joining today. We have an excellent guest for you today. Danielle Savory is a master certified life coach and the host of Mashable's #1 sex and relationship podcast called It's My Pleasure. And lucky us, today we get to have her as a guest on Overwhelmed Working Woman. As an overwhelmed working woman, I would bet that sex is sometimes the last thing on your mind, and that sometimes the idea of one more person asking you for anything or touching you is enough to put you over the edge. Danielle completely understands this. And in this episode, you'll learn to focus more on pleasure because you want to, not because you feel like you should. She'll give us some great practical tips on how to bring more pleasure into your life in the bedroom and out. She'll also give you an insider tip on why wearing wool socks to bed can improve your sex life. Welcome, Danielle, and thank you for being here. I'm so grateful you accepted this request to come on and share with us today.
Of course. I'm so excited to be here. When I got your email, I was like, yes, of course.
Good.
Yay.
Good. I'm so glad. Okay, first, I want to understand what you mean when you say you coach women to have better sex lives and better pleasure through the lens of your background. It's like a sciencey and a body and a mindset approach all at once, it sounds like. So will you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I think this is so much influenced by my own journey and, my own healing through my reclamation of my sexuality and becoming more sensual and really getting out of my head. So that somatics piece and that mindfulness piece is really taking from being up in our head, how most of us are most of the time, living from this neck up and learning like, oh yeah, I have a body. I am a body. I can feel with this body. And obviously, we need that element when it comes to being able to experience more pleasure. Because if you're not connected to your body, you can't really feel all the good, juicy touches and orgasms that could be happening there. So the somatics piece is really, really important, I think, especially for women, that because of all of the pressures that we have, because of all of the overwhelm that we have, is learning how to actually feel, learning how to be in our body, to notice when there's emotions that come up. Even some of the things that I might talk about are like the shape of your body. And I don't mean like the shape where you're like, what clothes size do I wear? But like how we hold ourselves. Where are our shoulders resting? Like, where is our jaw? Like these very subtle cues that can quickly tell you what state you're in. That if you are in a nervous system response state that's very stressed and tense and on edge, and starting to recognize those. So the somatic approach is really through the body. It's that mind-body connection, but being able to come back to our body, as it's like coming home to our body, really being in a different kind of relationship with our body, which we typically aren't taught how to do ever. But then especially as women, where our body is more looked at as an object that we need to be precise with. And there's that whole, beauty standards and perfectionism, and it's our vehicle to get from one place to the other. And then, the mindfulness piece behind that is really just how much our brain and what's going on in our mind influences, which I'm sure you talk about all the time on this podcast, right? Which influences our behaviors and the way that we show up and the way that we have these relationships. And with sex, it's not just like what is going on currently, right? Like what my partner is doing or isn't doing, or the mental or emotional load that I'm experiencing, or, how my kids are acting that day, or what my boss is doing at work. We take a look at that stuff because that's going to impact your current state. But then there's also things that we've been taught about sexuality that are still holding us back, what we've been taught about pleasure that are still holding us back. So it's both this like duality of noticing where are our obstacles that are keeping us from pleasure, and Oftentimes they're from how we've been socialized, they're from what's going on currently in our present day-to-day lives, and then what's happening in our body. And so being able to pull all of those together really gives us a more cohesive approach to being able to open up and access the pleasure our bodies are wired for.
Makes so much sense. Would you say that all women have a sex drive? I hear so often that people are like, I don't care. I don't care if I ever do it again.
Yeah. Well, I think the misconception is that it's a drive to start with. That's one of the first things that I really learned about, desire and our sexuality is that it really isn't a drive. It's like how we think about it. Yes, we have like this survival piece, but it's more a survival of the species, not like a survival of ourselves personally, to reproduce kind of thing. And so just understanding that it's not a drive and it's more, I like to think of it as a leaning in, right? Like what allows me to lean in a little bit. And when we understand that desire can show up very differently, even in just your lifetime, like your type of desire when you were younger or when you first started dating somebody is going to look a lot different than when you have a full plate and you have a lot of kids at home and or you have a lot of work to take care of or whatever it might be, but that our desire changes and that it can be like, there's these two types of desires that we talk about, which is spontaneous desire. And that's like you have the want before action happens. And then we have responsive desire, which is action happens and that precedes the wanting. And most women experience this latter, the responsive desire, which means we actually have to be in action before our brain kicks on and is like, oh, you know what? This actually feels good. This is a good idea. And, I think so many of us, we understand that when it comes to like working out. I am a hiker and being in the Pacific Northwest, it's not great weather a lot of the times. And I'm like, I don't want to go out there today. It's cold, it's rainy. I don't want to be at the muddy trail and all this stuff. And then once I'm there, right, taking action, then all of a sudden I'm like, this is great. I love this. I'm so glad I came, right? And so it's that desire for it happens after I've taken action. And for so many women, what we really want to focus on more is not like, oh, I'm sitting around waiting for desire to kick in, but how can I create a container that desire even has a chance to show up? How can I actually create safety and at least a little bit of leaning in and willingness and curiosity in my body so that my brain and my body has a chance to want this. And the way that most of our lives are structured, throughout the day, there aren't these chances. So sitting around just like waiting for someone to just wave a wand and light your loins on fire doesn't really work.
It doesn't, yes. Yes. And I feel like a lot of times, much like working out, I feel like the women who I talk to are just not motivated. They're like, what's the point of doing it?
Yes.
So, especially if it's not great for them personally.
Yeah.
So where would you start with that if a client came to you with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of women do come to me with that. And part of it is like, what comes first, chicken then the egg, right? Like we want you to have the kind of sex you crave. So that is a big part of it. So I think just understanding the possibility that what you're having right now can be so much better. I think that is a huge just belief and like a mindset we have to go into. Like it is possible for me to feel better. It is possible for this to get better. It is possible for me to enjoy that better. I think that starts, right? Like we want that to start. And a lot of women I talk to, it's like they're having sex anyway. Maybe it's not that often, but they usually are having some sex. And it's like, well, if you're going to do it anyway, then we might as well make it better. Like we might as well have it be more enjoyable.
It might as well be fun for you too.
Yes, yes,
exactly.
yeah. So learning that like it can be and how we can like up the experience of satisfaction and pleasure is a big part of it. But as far as the motivation goes, this was one for me for a long time that I really had to and I keep coming back to like, what are other reasons? What are other reasons this is benefiting my life? Because until you have the evidence for it, it's kind of hard and it's not something that we've talked about. from a physiological standpoint, there's so many studies that just show like how, how it just helps with your immune system, how it helps with your stress levels, how it helps with like your heart rate. There's tons of health benefits. Like you can Google them and you'll have an entire list of all of these things that it can do for you health wise. I really like to focus on what it does for our brains. And when we start to prioritize pleasure, what are the things that gets to shift? And when we talk about motivation, so many of us want motivation in lots of areas of our life, like to start that business, to write that book, to like get up and like take care of, maybe finally organizing that closet that's been sitting around, like whatever it might be. We're all looking for like that energy to feel motivated.
Yeah.
And pleasure is one of the best things we can do for our brain when it comes to creating more motivation, when it comes to using our amygdala. And most people have heard of the amygdala, but it's more of like that alarm bell system that creates more stress in the body. But the amygdala can be our friend when it's on our side to activate motivation. And when you experience more pleasure, when you experience more satisfaction, that's what it gets to do. It gets to get you kind of like, ooh, yeah, I get to go work on this thing instead of like, oh, I'm so stressed and, out. So we want to use our nervous system in a way that helps us create our goals. And so pleasure, like when you understand like the role that pleasure plays, it's a huge part of our motivation. It's a huge part of our ability to have the kind of relationships, intimacy, deep connection, that sort of thing that we want, whether it's with our children or our friends or our coworkers or our lover. Like understanding that pleasure and the neurochemicals that are released from more pleasure is a huge part of the kind of relationships that we think about. And this is going to sound kind of morbid, but like end of life, like that was amazing. I got that kind of a relationship, that deep connection, like I'm present, I'm enjoying this. I love the people around me. Like pleasure allows for that to happen. Pleasure allows for, the oxytocin and all of these other neurochemicals for that kind of connection. The other thing is just I always love to look at stuff that's going to help me grow beyond just like how it's helping my brain, but my growth. And like for me as a woman who's been socialized as a woman, reclaiming something that society has told me isn't for me and is off limits and, shouldn't even be on my radar, that feels very liberating. Like I get to reclaim sexuality on my own terms. And when we talk about just how good the experience of pleasure is physiologically and neurologically, the most like easiest way to experience the biggest flood of pleasure is through our genitals. So why wouldn't I reclaim this for me? Why wouldn't I take it back for me? It's right there. It's free. I can enjoy it. And it's going to have all of these like far reaching mental, emotional health benefits, but also like allowing me to be more creative so I can come up with great stuff to change the world.
Yeah, exactly. What an added bonus.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the women listening to this podcast are so busy all the time. They're usually moms, multiple kids, stressful jobs. And this is just the thing that doesn't make it to the priority list or is kind of like, yeah, maybe once a month or something, I'll check that box. And I love your approach of talking about it as pleasure. And some of that pleasure you're talking about is not sex, just general pleasure in life. If somebody is going from just like, it's not on my list whatsoever, how would you help them just starting to get the idea of pleasure? Just little baby steps to start with that.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said here too, just about being on on the last thing on your list. And I just want to say, like, if that's you, really welcome to the club. Like, I really want to normalize that this is the way that it is for pretty much every woman until they have kind of, purposely and intentionally taken a look at it. And that pleasure and when it comes to sex, it's because it's never been presented to us for us. And so it's like, it makes sense that it's the last thing on the list because we have never really given ourselves the permission to explore, how could this be for me? It feels like one more thing we're giving or one more thing we should do, or we know it's good for our marriage, but it really isn't ever about you and you
Yeah.
receiving the benefits. And so I think just starting with like, oh, this could be for me, whether it is taking time to experience just pleasure, in general, which I'll talk about in a minute, but or with your partner, it's the idea of like, oh, this can be for me. This moment can be for me. This experience, this touch, this receiving. And so many of the women that I talk to, especially those, in heterosexual relationships, feel that it's like, oh, well, it's because he wants it. It's one more thing I need to give him, or I'm lacking, or it's like another should that I'm not being a good wife or a good, person in this marriage or partnership or whatever it might be. It's this less than kind of feeling. And that's only because we feel like we're giving something when it's not something you're giving, but when it becomes something you're receiving and you really feel that in every cell of your body, it's a totally different
That
game.
makes so much sense. And is that truly just a mindset change? Just thinking of it in a different way? Like, this is something that could be really great for me, that I could receive this?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it starts is that mindset change. But you also have to be a place in your body and nervous system wise that you can receive. So many of us, because we are always in this place of giving, 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 right? You don't actually have to create safety in your nervous system. You don't actually have to create, this container where there's possible vulnerability. Like when we are in control, which is when we're giving, because we are choosing what we're giving, then there can be a shell up, there can be this wall up. And when you give yourself permission to receive, you really do have to let the walls down. You really do have to come home into your body and feel this trusting relationship, not just with the person you're with, but with yourself. And like, I'm okay. It's okay for me to stop thinking about my to-do list. It's okay for me to lay here and take the time I need, not the time I think I should be giving, And so, yes, it's a mindset, but there's so many nuances when it comes to, especially in those moments in the bedroom, because we have been so taught to make it more of this performative act and to be able to come back and like really receive and not worry about your partner or what they're thinking or how long you're taking or what you look like and just receive. It takes a lot of little mindset tweaks along the way.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes so much sense. And what about something that I hear all the time too is like, everyone's always touching me. I don't want
Yeah.
anyone to touch me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good one. And I think, the more that you understand about your nervous system and like how we are when we're overwhelmed and overstimulated, all kind of touch coming to you feels like a threat to your nervous system when you're there, right? When you're all like, and like there's so many things going on and you're overwhelmed, you're overstimulated, like to just understand, of course, I don't want touch right now. Like my body feels like it's under attack. So any little hand or big hand or like a friendly, flirty slap on the ass is gonna feel like being attacked by a tiger. Okay. So it's
Like, I'm trying to do the dishes. Could you not?
get off of me. Like, knock it off. Right. And so it's like when you normalize that and understand that and even communicate that with your partner, it's not a big deal. It's not like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I used to be so fun and playful. And now I'm like this, like, rigid woman and snapping at her husband. It's like, no. Oh, it's like, oh, love. Like, of course you're reacting to touch that way. I've had a really stressful day and now I'm hangry and now everybody's waiting for me to finish cooking. Of course. So I think it's just acknowledging and normalizing like this response, like anybody's body that feels like it's under attack and has somebody reaching for them will also feel like that reach is under attack. It isn't actually the hand. It isn't actually your partner. It isn't actually even the idea that is creating that response. This is just how your body is wired. And that was such a huge unlock for me. And it is for so many of my clients because it's like we don't have to add story to it. And then it's like, oh, well, I can just get into my body, or I call bridge to the bedroom. So it's like, oh, I can create a bridge to the bedroom activity because I do really want to experience pleasure. And that sounds nice. And then creating the space to there's a number of different things that you can do, but to get out of that stress cycle, to regulate your nervous system, to get out of overstimulation, then all of a sudden touch feels really nice because of where your body and brain are at, not because you didn't want it, because you don't like it, because you guys have lost that loving feeling. It's like none of that. It's like, no, I'm just overwhelmed right now. That's it.
Yeah. I love the way that you just made that completely neutral and a biological thing. Like your body thinks it's under attack in that moment. It's okay that you do not want anyone else to touch you. Yeah. Totally fine. Yeah.
And communicating that with your partner. Like now my husband understands. And even if he still does it, I give him the eye. He was like, I know. It's not welcome right now. Like, I'm sorry, right? And like backs off.
Yeah.
And I was like, he was like, I'm going to give you food and you are just going to want me. And I was like, yeah, right. And then I eat. And I'm like, okay, you look kind of cute now.
Okay, it works. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Oh, we can talk now. Will you cuddle me? Yeah. Like,
I love that he knows that. He's like, I won't touch you. I'm just going to make you a grilled cheese.
Yes.
He
was like, I feel like you're not going to be mad at me in 30 minutes after I feed you. And I'm like, no, this is real. I'm really mad at you.
Yeah, I'm seriously pissed right now.
I'm seriously.
So funny. I heard you say on one of your recent podcasts, and this was, I thought, kind of mind-blowing, that it's easier for us to take care of other people than to prioritize or take care of ourselves. And I feel like every single person listening to this podcast takes care of other people and prioritizes other people often before themselves. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that ties in with sex and pleasure?
Yeah, it came from this conversation I was having with my client. And, I think it's easy, especially if you're the main caretaker. And even if you're not, like most of us women are caretaking, whether it's in our home or in our business, like we're giving a lot. We're taking care of each other a lot. And the giving becomes what I want to say. It's not easy. Like, I don't want to say, oh, taking care of your aging parents is easy, or taking care of young children is easy, or having teenagers in your house is easy. It's not easy in that, but it's easier for us to fall into that role because it's become habit, because this is what society has really laid out for us that we are meant to be doing or that we should be doing. Like, we know how to do that. We don't know how to pause and say no to the giving and the doing so that we could take a 20-minute nap. We don't know how to say no to all of the to-do list or the PTA or whatever might be coming your way, or the boss's like late night email, can you hurry and get this done? Like, we don't know how to say no to that and prioritize feeling good, feeling rested, feeling taken care of. And so when I say it's easier, it's always easier to take care of other people. It's not because the task itself is easier, but because it's more practiced. And so when it comes to pleasure and when it comes to sex, it is not practice for us to think about our pleasure, to wake up and be like, how am I going to feel good today? What could I do right now?
Absolutely. It's like if I happen to have an open spot in my day where no one needs anything and I don't have anything to do, then I'll have some kind of pleasure in my life. And that never happens. It has to be on purpose, planned out. Yes.
Yeah. It's like I recently had a birthday last week and everyone was like, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like the assumption is, oh, it's your birthday. Now is your time to treat yourself. You should go to the spa. You should get a massage. Why don't you go get like a pedicure or manicure? And it's like, no. We do not need to like wait for our birthday or this day off. And I'm not saying that we need to stack our day with spa appointments or something like that. Like, that would be great. That's not my reality. And I know that's not the reality for most people. But when you think about it more from the lens of feeling good and understanding that you can feel good in your body, you can experience like moment to moment pleasures. You can turn your attention to what's draining you and instead choosing like what can fuel you and light you up. Even if they're the same tasks. Like, this is like, people are like, well, I have all these to-do lists. And I was like, yeah, but we can approach them in a different way where there is more pleasure being had. And 20 minutes, whether it's 20 minutes to meditate or 20 minutes to take a nap or 20 minutes to like spend some time putting lotion on your body, like, we're worth that time. That's not a lot of time. And so learning how to practice pleasure is huge, and it changes the game, especially when you start your morning of like, of course I'm going to feel good. Like, here's my day, here's my schedule, and how am I going to feel good?
Yeah, I love that. If that's your first thought in the morning, the chances of something actually happening that is,
Yeah.
full of pleasure is so much better. I love that. I'm going to take that tip.
Yeah.
I have so many questions for you. And I also want to hear the results that some of your clients have gotten. But I think the last one that I'll ask you is, typically speaking, kids wreck our sex lives. I feel like most people I talk to, it's like, it used to be so great and we used to have this connection and now it's just gone. And so I'm wondering, in your opinion, can we get that back? Is that something that can come back for couples if somebody's listening right now and they're like, oh, I'm sad I missed that. It's just gone though.
Absolutely. I'm living proof of it. And many of my clients are too, right? It's like I definitely, and I think it's also understanding that where the age of your children are at is going to make a difference. But we don't have to mean like, oh, I miss that. I want that. I think part of it is like this pining for something that once was that isn't anymore. That is part of the problem. Where instead we could look at, it's even like my pre-nursing boobs were fabulous. Like I miss those, but I'm not like sitting dwelling around like, God, I just wish I had those boobs back. It's like there has to be a grief period for a lot of things. Like,
and then
I
just
grief
move
studies,
on.
those were awesome. And then we're going to move on. And how can I just love them now? Right. And it's like with my marriage and every single chapter that we go through, it's like, oh, but we get this now. Like we love this now. And like, oh, this is so fun now. And you can grieve. I think that's a huge part of it. Grieving what once was, but not thinking like that was the best of us or that was the best of the years. I feel like my sex life keeps getting better and better, and my intimacy with my husband keeps getting better and better. And I believe that's possible for, most couples, if that's your intent, if that's what you both want together, to grow together and to learn how to find those moments and understanding that it is different, So it's like when they were younger, and we still do this now, right? But it's like, nap time, quote unquote. You can't see my air quotes, but like nap time on the weekends was our chance because at nighttime, we were kind of tired and we didn't know how bedtime was going to go. And, if I was nursing or pumping, so we were able to carve out like nap time. And I think finding those small moments of intimacy throughout the day, like you might not be able to like take all of your clothes off and like have a nice like 2-hour session with one another, but you can connect, like you can hug each other and you can kiss with an open mouth and you can hold hands every once in a while, or you can remind yourself to look across the dinner table at your partner and remember why you fell in love with them. Like, remember that this is your person, that is your lover, not just your roommate. They're not just like going through all the tasks of parenting, but like, oh, he's pretty cute.
Yeah,
or
I love that. Yeah, exactly. Or he cooks a good dinner, that one. I like it. Yes.
Or like, look at how he's asking the kids questions or like cracking like stupid dad jokes again, like as stupid as they are. Like, I love it. Like he's still
So
trying to
cute.
make us all laugh.
Yeah, exactly. He's so cute. Oh, good. So tell me some of the results that your clients get when they work with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of the like just obvious results I want to say is more orgasms, like just better sex in general.
Who would turn that down? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But, I think the thing that's the most surprising for all my clients, even though they hear it going through, is how different it changes outside of the bedroom. It's like, yes, the orgasms, the sex get better, but, it's that energy that you feel where you're like playful again, where you're feeling kind of just this sachet or like this like pep to your step. I feel like that to me is the most profound change I see in clients. It's like, yes, the sex gets better. Yes, you want it again. Yes, it becomes regular. I remember one client, she got on a call and she was so upset because she wanted it and her husband didn't. And I was like, hold on, can we make this a celebration? Because when you first came to me, you never wanted it. You never wanted to have sex again. And now you're experiencing rejection. Like this is a high class problem.
Yeah.
This is pretty good. Like let's just acknowledge. So it's like, yes, the desire, yes, the orgasms, yes, that, but it's like walking around with this full spectrum of human, experiences. When you open up to pleasure, you really get to see all the different colors in our color wheel. The life becomes vibrant. I've had multiple clients explain it, not knowing that other people had explained it this way, that it's like Dorothy when she comes out of Kansas. It's like all of a sudden it's like Technicolor, right? And you don't realize like how vibrant and how juicy and delicious like your life can be when we're consistently operating on this low level of like simmer of stress all the time, when we're operating on autopilot. Like it wakes you up to just a new way of being that feels really good, but also just feels connected. Like the way that I feel connected in my relationships and alive in my relationships, not just in the sheets.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. I feel like who wouldn't want that too? I mean, imagine how just going to work in the morning would feel so different if you
Yeah.
just felt good and like life was full of Technicolor
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
land of Oz. I
like
love
when you're
that.
laughing in traffic and you're listening to music and you're singing at the top of your lungs, like you see those people and you're like, why would you be doing that? I'm running late. And it's like,
Yeah.
that actually is possible. And it's not just this like Pollyanna nonsense. We still feel our hard feelings. We still have challenges, and there's a levity to it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Before we go, please tell us where people can find you if they're interested in working with you and how they can work with you.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. It's at the practice of pleasure. I like to pop in and do, silly reels and videos and little gems for you every once in a while. And then on my podcast, it's called It's My Pleasure. And then if you want to work with me, there's a couple of freebies, like starting your morning off with this pleasure practice. I will give Michelle the link for that. But that's a great way to just start. And that's a totally free course that I have for everyone. Or if you're in one of these long-term relationships and you're like, how do I really start to like find that spark? I also have a free course called Fresh. And so you can check out either of those.
Okay, awesome. And I know too, I would encourage everybody to follow you because you offer some great master classes from time to time. I've definitely taken and benefited from some of your classes, and those are always really fun too. So everybody should just follow you and start learning about the pleasure of life. Oh my gosh. As a parting story, because I just remembered this when you said about Instagram, can you please tell them about your love of your wool socks and how that plays into your sex life?
Yes. Well, it's so funny because it actually is a study. Like a study came out a number of years ago that people that wore socks had more orgasms or better orgasms than women that didn't. Yeah. But the reason is like, it's such a, I don't know the word that I'm looking for, like a misconception of why, right? So it's not really about the wool socks. I wear wool socks. I live in the Pacific Northwest because my feet get cold. And I don't really care how ugly they look. Like my husband can deal with it. It's like, this is me. But the reason why it helps so much is because when we are trying to land in our body, when we are trying to experience pleasure, there's so many things that are going to take us out of our body. If you're cold, your body and your brain is like, this is a big deal. We need to focus on being cold. Like, what if she actually like gets hypothermia, right? So like imagine like if you've ever watched Inside Out, like the little characters in your brain, like freaking out, like she might get cold, she might get cold, emergency, right? And so when we think about, there's all these little things that our brain is constantly scanning for threats. And if one of them is being cold, then put some socks on. Like make out in a cardigan. Like I wear an open thing cardigan and wool socks, and I have no shame about it because it allows me to be more present with the pleasure and the sex that I'm having. And so that is like one of the many things. Like I know for me, I have like ADHD and neurodivergent brain. So sometimes if I'm really overstimulated, wearing earplugs, closing my eyes, wearing, an eye mask, wool socks, like all the things to minimize the distractions so I can be fully in my body.
I love it.
Hey, it works. And,
exactly,
the orgasms are coming. So
yes,
I'm not going to complain. Yeah.
Your husband probably gets excited when he sees the wool socks come out now. He's like, ooh, I know what this means.
He's like the business socks. I don't know if you ever watched Flight of the Conchords. It's like a very old show. But there was this whole skit there. they do with socks. And he's like, I've got my business socks on. It means business time. Anyway, so I think of that like thing. And he's like, oh, you got your business socks on. I was like, you ready? I got my good ones. Let's go.
Exactly. You getting down to business? Got my wool socks on.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And I love everything you're doing. I think this is going to be so helpful to the overwhelmed working women who are listening today. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Overwhelmed Working Woman podcast. If you want to learn more about my work, head over to my website at michellegauthier.com. See you next week.